Hey everybody. We'll give everybody some time to show up. Let me know if you can. Yeah, we're moving up. I've started playing with my streaming software a little bit more and figured out how to do a picture-in-picture, so there you go. Hey Chris, how's it going? We'll give everybody time to show up. We're not supposed to start for another 5 minutes or so, so we'll just hang out. Hey David, I don't know how to say your name, Vagilis? Anyway, how's it going? There's been some thundering outside. Hopefully that won't turn into something too noisy or losing the power or anything like that. But if you hear any rain, Eric just asked if anybody's using DAT for podcast distribution. Yeah, if you go to datcast.hashbase.io, make sure I got that right. Oh, there may be a dash in it. Let's see. The first, as far as I know, DAT-based DATcast, or podcast rather. Yeah, it's all about DAT. We got interviewed not that long ago. It's pretty good. You should check it out. It's run by Jim Pick and Brett Combs, who are two awesome members of the community, and they generally know what's going on around here, so they're the right people to talk to or to listen to. There it is. There's the preview version. Somebody's asking, can we disable IPv6 on Beaker? I don't know if DAT uses IPv6 right now. We may still be using IPv4. While we're waiting, does anybody have any weekend projects or anything DAT related fun they want to share in the chat? We just got back from the Decentralized Web Summit, which was actually about a week ago at the Internet Archive in the San Francisco Mint. It was pretty fun. A lot of folks doing some pretty incredible work. I think they have videos of everything if you want to look that up. I think it's like decentralizedweb.net maybe. You can check that right now. Yeah. So they're putting up videos somewhere. It may be all on the Internet Archive. So I don't know where they're uploading those videos, but it's a lot of good stuff. I'd recommend checking it out if you're interested in decentralization. Yeah, that poetry experiment. Let me think. Do I have that? David Whitmore is tweeting that asking if I have a carpal tunnel thing on my wrist. Yes, I do. I had to start wearing these things about 5 years ago. All right, well, it's 2 o'clock. 20 folks watching. I'm sure we'll have more people join, so let's get into it and jump into the direct camera here. All right, so hey everybody. It's your weekly Beaker building webcast. We are going to get into today building a personal site, which may end up being a kind of a multi-week process, and this will just be step 1 in that process, because we have a couple of different ideas that we think will be exciting to try out with the idea of a personal website and changing maybe how you think about personal websites on the web. So step 1, it's going to be pretty straightforward. It's just putting together the framework for the site. So we want to work on getting the presentation right, so when somebody lands on it, what does it look like? And we're not going to spend a lot of time styling, but what we will do is work on using some web components, some ES modules, and the basic Beaker tools. I basically started working on my own website, and that's how this got started. And I had a rule for myself that I've had for a while, which is I'm not going to use any frameworks anymore. No frameworks, no libraries, no build steps. We're going to do this entirely in vanilla JavaScript, using just the tools that the Beaker browser gives you, many of which have been part of Chrome, since Beaker is a Chrome fork, but then of course with the DAT tools on top. So the website that I'm working on, I guess I don't have that open, so maybe I'll share that another time. But I'm going to be working off of some of the ideas that I've been exploring in my own website and showing how you can do them here. So again, we're going to be using ES modules, web components, and the DAT tools. So let me check if anybody has any questions, and if not, we'll get started. Okay, I think we're good. Let's get going here. Let me get us a picture again. There we go. All right. So let's start by making ourselves a new website. I'm going to just do an empty one. And we're going to call this bob.com. We'll just pretend our name is Bob, and we're making the website for Bob. So I'm going to, by default, whenever you create a website in Beaker, it's just inside of Beaker. There's no local folder. But what you can do is set a local directory on your file system that will synchronize with the DAT, and that way you can do you can work on the website from your favorite editor, and it'll automatically publish into the site. So let's go ahead and do that. So it'll be sites bobcom, and there it is. Open up for us. So now if I open up the page itself, nothing on it yet. So why don't we go ahead and dig into some index.html. Now I am going to now come over here, copy the path, and open up bobcom and Sublime. Let's turn on live reloading because that's pretty handy when you're working. And let's get an index.html in there. Can you all hear that with thunder? It's coming out pretty hard right now. Alright, so let's get our basic structure of an HTML site. And there we go. All right, Bob Boberson now has his personal website underway. Now then, let's start by improving some of the default styles. I want to do this also to demonstrate how you can do cross-linking between DAT sites. So I have this UI kit that I use for pretty much everything nowadays. pauls-uikit.hashbase.io. I have a bunch of reusable CSS, reusable components that I use for this, from this rather. And so I'm going to go ahead and import my base styles that I like to use everywhere. And I'm just going to import it directly from that domain. I believe that's the path. So let's save it and take a look at the results of this. Okay, so you notice we got away from that serif font. Let me do it again so you can see the before and after. So that's now default styles, and here we're pulling in my custom styles, and the first thing you notice is the typography changes. I've got a couple other things that I can pull in here, and so let's go ahead and pull in a couple of those components, like this nice section styling. And there we go, right? So this is some CSS and a couple of JavaScript components that I have that I'm able to import across domains. Nice little way to do code sharing. Now I won't get too deep into code sharing across modules, I don't think, in this particular live stream, but it's something I use quite a bit now anytime I'm working on a project. It's almost kind of like the equivalent of what NPM does for the Node ecosystem. That's what we're doing with these basic DAT sites. And over time what we'll end up doing is use versioning on these things so that I can pin a particular version and I don't have to worry about these styles changing on me down the road. Is there an equivalent to Bootstrap's 12-column layout? I mean, not in my thing, because I've been having a lot of success with Flexbox in CSS, so I don't feel personally like I need to have that put into markup for me, but it'd be very easy for somebody to make their own sort of grid system. So let's see, what do we want to do next? Let's go ahead and get the layout handled. And I'm going to do probably a site design that nobody would ever do in reality, but I'm just going to use my little styles here, and let's start by doing div id equals layout. Actually, yeah, let's do div id equals layout. Let's do div id. We're just going to do a 3-column layout. That's actually a pretty standard thing to do. And there will be 2 side columns with the navigation in the left column. The center column will be the content, and then the right column could be anything we want. Maybe like some links. You could stick ads in there if you're the sort of person to make ads or to use ads. No judgment there. Why not? All right. Let's get our style sheet going. And let's do class layout. Side column. Let's import the style sheet. Okay, now we got our 3-column layout. So David, yes, I agree, Flexbox is awesome, and Grid is making me even happier lately. Grid is terrible to figure out, but once you do, it's like, oh man, I was never able to do this with such convenience before, so I'm a huge fan of Grid. Joshua asked, does importing ES modules across domains work? It does, and it's awesome, and I'm going to show that a little bit later. Okay, so Right, okay, so we got our styles. Let's finish up here. I think the width maybe needs to be 100%. Actually, why don't we do a centered layout here? So let's do a max width of 960 pixels. And then let's do a margin another margin to center it. And we should now see it center up. Good. Okay, that's interesting. Now, just so I can get a sense of what's going on, I'm going to set a background on the body and a background on the layout to make sure this is all working correctly. Yeah, okay. Let's see, 960 minus 120 minus 120. Is that? Yeah, let's do 120. No, that's too small. Let's do 160. Okay, let's get that background back off of it. And let's do a really simple navigation here. Home. And we're going to have 3 pages on our personal website here. A photo album, a home page, and an about page. And we will expand over this website as this sort of multi-week project moves forward. But for now, we're going to do some very basic content. So home, photos, and about. All right. And then let's get some links on these things. Okay, and here we go. Actually, let's take the link off of the home because that's where we're at right now. Okay. Okay, so we got basically the elements that make up a personal website now. It's pretty ugly, but here we are. Now, we want to add a couple of other pages to the website, right? We want to have photos and about. Now, there's a really obvious first thing you would do here, which is just copy and paste about.html, and you would, when you're on the about page, of course, you're going to take the link off the about item in the nav, right? And you're going to put it back on the home. And I'll demonstrate the effect this has in a moment here. So I just copied the index page, and now you can go between them, and it looks like you got the nav updating, so the one that you're on isn't a link, right? And that's fine. You could definitely do things this way, but it's going to be kind of tedious to maintain your site because you're going to have to basically duplicate any changes you make that should apply to, for instance, the layout. You'd have to redo that change every time you make a new page. In fact, why don't I go ahead and make the photos page too? Right, so I just had to copy and paste again, and I'm fixing up the links here, but this is crazy, right? This reminds me of like the old PHP days, and I have worked those jobs where you inherit a legacy code base with just like hundreds of PHP files that have been copied and pasted at some point, because at that point the code reuse wasn't that good in the PHP stack. This is like really early PHP projects. Oh, I gotta change the photos stuff. So that's just a no-go, right? We know how that goes. It doesn't end well. So we need to have something that allows us to get some code reuse in here. But we're not going to use any libraries or frameworks or anything like that. So how are we going to do that? Well, recently what I've started to do is try out web components. And I tried web components before, didn't really have a great experience, but this time around it's actually gone pretty well for me. And so that's what we're going to use here. It's an interesting collection of different APIs. I would imagine if you haven't used web components before, a lot of this will be kind of like, unfamiliar. So, don't worry too much if there's something that you don't understand. Of course, you can ask questions, but for the most part, just kind of see what it's like to build with web components. And what we're going to do is build a web component which handles the layout for us, as well as the navigation, so that not only can we reuse the layout in a fairly convenient fashion from one page to another, we also want that navigation to correctly only linkify the other pages instead of us having to manually do it. So let's get into making ourselves a web component, and I'm first going to create a folder in the project called the components folder. Sometimes I just name this folder the com folder, but we'll call this components. and we'll make layout.js. And I'm going to cheat and refer to my previous work so I remember what the heck I'm doing. Alright. So, when you create a web component, and by the way, I'm not a total expert at web components, so hopefully I'll get everything right. We're going to call it the layout element, and we're going to extend it from the HTML element, which is a built-in class type inside of the browser. And we're going to write a constructor, which calls out to the super. And then we're going to go ahead and define this element as something that can be used inside a markup. You do that by calling custom elements, which is a browser API, .define. And then we're going to call it, let's do Bob's layout. Now, an interesting thing about web components is that you have to have a dash in there somewhere, which sort of forces you to namespace everything. So that's what this Bob's is, right? Bob's is the namespace. I'm pretending I'm Bob, and so it's my layout, Bob's layout, there you have it. Now there is, let's see, for the sake of experiment or sort of building our way to the endpoint, I'm just going to go ahead and do something really straightforward that we won't end up wanting to do, which is setting the HTML directly from within the constructor like this. I'm going to go over to index.html, and I'm going to go down to the bottom here and pull in my module. And then I'm going to go right to the top here, and I'm going to use the new element. Save that, and go to the home page, and there it is, hello from the layout. So look at that, you know, it's actually pretty cool getting to define our own custom elements like that. It's something that people have been trying to do since, like, oh man, HTML4. All the DHTML or XHTML projects where they were trying to make extensible HTML. Now it's being tried again, and I know everybody's a little bit divided on whether or not it's successful, but so far this is working pretty well for me, and I think it's pretty cool that I get to do this. So, alright, we got Bob's layout. Now let's actually render to this thing. A lot of the times what you use on these web components is something called the shadow DOM, which is a way of sort of encapsulating the inner markup or the inner DOM of the element. So why don't we just go ahead and do that. You use a pretty straightforward method to do this. It's called attach shadow. I'm going to just not explain things that I don't totally have a good grip on, so don't ask me what the mode open is about. I haven't read up enough to know. But attach shadow basically creates this idea of a shadow DOM that is specific to this element. And now if I were to change anything about the shadow DOM, it would be sort of put in place to where this element exists. So in fact, if I do shadow.internet.html, it should have the exact same effect as before. We're still seeing this hello from layout. But if I open up the inspector, we can actually see how the shadow DOM begins to have an effect here, because it's now scoped inside of the shadow root, right? Kind of a weird thing, and I'm still getting the hang of it, but it does some interesting things. One of the most interesting things that I've noticed about it is that it scopes all of the styles inside of it. So you can do inline styles, or you can even use a link tag to import a style sheet into that shadow root, and it won't leak out into the rest of the page, which is pretty handy in certain situations. So let me show you how this works. I'm going to do an inline style real quick. Let's change that to that. And let's just do like, let's do div background red. And then let's go over here and change this to a div. Now, if I got this right, we should see just, yeah, right? Okay, we have divs elsewhere in the page, but only the div inside of that shadow DOM is getting that background red put on it, okay? So style scoping is a part of web components. It's pretty handy stuff. All right, you can also style the web component from the outside, but I'm still getting the hang of that. So I've done it a couple times, but I don't feel so confident that I'm going to demonstrate it now. So we got the shadow DOM. Now, one other element that's worth noting is that the way that I use this component, it can have elements inside of it as well, right? And the interaction between whatever I put inside of it right now and what is in the shadow DOM is actually in and of itself sort of interesting. So let's do hello from the page, okay? Now, we're not going to see that there yet, because right now it's actually getting more or less clobbered. But I can actually insert what is inside of the markup here using what's called a slot. So I take the slot and I put it inside of the shadow DOM somewhere, and what we will see now is hello from the page showing up inside of the shadow DOM. So now we have a little bit of a compositional ability here. You can take the markup that the web component adds into the page, and you can take the markup that you put inside of the component whenever you use it, put those together, and now you're composing markup from two different places. And this is really good because we have a layout element here. We want to bring in all the layout, but then we want the content to come from the page itself. So Bob's layout, here is the content of the index, so I'm going to put that inside of here. And then the goal is to take all the rest of this and put it into the layout element itself. So let's go ahead and do that. Take it all out, look at this one. We'll go over to the layout. And let's put a slot right in the center. And what we should see is, haha, we're missing one thing. We're close. We're missing one thing, and that is the styles of the layout. So let's go over to create a new layout.css. Let's steal these layout styles, put it inside of our new CSS file. This is that scoped CSS I was talking about. So I'm just going to put a link, rally style sheet, href, components, layout.css. And now, there we have it. We got our layout. Okay, so now what I can do is go to these other, let's look at our index.html again. We're now down to a much more minimal, in fact I can get rid of this. We're in a more minimal sort of basic reusable HTML here, right? The content of the particular page is all right here. So here is the reusable sort of boilerplate for every page, and then this is the stuff that's specific to a page. So I'm going to real quick copy this, and then I'm going to go to About. I'm going to replace all that with that. I'm going to go to Photos. I'm going to replace everything with that. And now, if we go to the Photos page and the About page, we should have the same layout on every one, but the content changes for each. Okay, I need to make one quick change. The center ought to be a flex one. Okay, so now we've got reusable layout on every page that we go to, right? So now we are being good in DRY with the way that we're creating our website. This is the kind of stuff that you would normally do with some kind of static site generator. Like we right now create the Beaker browser website using Jekyll, right? And there's a lot of really good static website generators out there. Or if you're doing a web service, pretty frequently what you'll do is maybe server-side rendering. You'll dynamically generate the HTML using PHP or something like that. And that's how you get the DRY in your HTML, right? The DRY, don't repeat yourself, right? The reusability. So what we're doing here instead is we're getting no pre-rendering, right? There's no pre-generation of the HTML. We're not doing any, well, it's all being basically generated in the client at load time, right? And we're using the web components to accomplish that. All right, now let me see, I got a couple questions here. So Eric asked, is Dat creating a new version of your site with every save of each file? It's a new version of the site, but it's still the same URL. So you're going to, if I go back to the site here, this is the URL that is underneath my site, right? This long 64-character string. This is essentially the equivalent of an IP address. And you can map DNS names to these long hashes. This is actually a public key, right? So I could map a DNS name to it, and that's why you can go to dat.ecobrowser.com. And internally, that's mapping, or what it does is it looks up the that long public key using the DNS system, and there you have it, a short name. But since I'm just working on this thing on my own computer, similar to using 127.0.0.1 whenever I'm doing dev work, in this case I'm just using the raw public key. Yeah, so hopefully that answers some aspect of what it means to save a file on your site, how that change happens. Ranger is correct, it gets added, each change gets added to a metadata log that is kept by every site. In fact, if we want to see the metadata log for this site, here it is right here. So you can basically see every revision that I've made as we've worked, and you can actually go back in time and look at these things. So let's do a look back at the original index.html. Oh, one very pretty, let's get one version past that. Right? This is how we started things. This is back at revision 5. Right there, revision 5. We're still working on exactly how the version URLs are going to work, but they do work. That syntax is probably what we'll keep. We're also talking about some other features on that, but I won't get into that. Stay focused here. Okay, Jared asks, is the metadata log comparable to Git versioning? Comparable. It's to the same basic premise. Okay, so we've got this layout that's reusable, which is great, but the links on the left are not updating, right? We need the nav to be a little bit smarter than it is. So let's just go ahead and program that into our layout code. So I'm going to write a little helper function. Nav link and path name and label. Okay. So here's how this is going to work. We're going to replace each one of these LIs with this function right here, and I'm just going to look at the window.location and see which page we're on and render accordingly. So let's do and that should do it. Everybody have a moment to see this code. We are calling the same render function for each time, and then what we do is we check the current location against the path name of the given location. If it is the current page, then we just get rid of the link. But if it's not the current page, we include the link inside of it. And there you have it. Now we have a dynamic navigation to go with our reusable layout. Alright. So let me check my to-do list here. What else did I want to hit? Okay. Yeah. Alright, so let's go ahead and get a little bit of content in here. How about we create a folder for photos. And then let's go over to my got some photos pre-prepared from our time at the DWeb Summit. Copy those from somewhere else. So let's get that photo page going. Now I'm going to do the same thing I always do. I'm going to do the sort of obvious solution, and I'm going to make the automated solution. The obvious solution is just to start putting a bunch of image tags inside of here, referencing the different photos. let's see. Oh, we need to get rid of that slash. Oh, let's do that. Okay. Let me think. That's a bug. I'm going to have to switch over to... Yeah, just ran into a bug that I fixed in the current version of Beaker, but haven't fixed in the live build, so I'm going to have to change a little bit about how I've written it. Let me just do that real quick. I'm going to have to include the .html. Okay, we can work with this. Alright, pay no attention to the unexpected bugs. Okay, well, we obviously had some styles problems here, so I'm just going to real fast use a style tag to fix it in the sort of dumb way. I want the max width to be 100% so that the image doesn't just completely overflow on us like it just did there. Let's go back to the photos page. Alright, that's better, right? Now we got a couple of different photos, so let's like bring them in just real quick. There was talking about a panel, and there was the science fair, and I think that gives us 3 images. Yeah, alright, so we got a couple of images, great. And why don't we get some grid styles in there? Let me think. I think I have those grid styles already written, so let me jump over to that. Yes. Now I'm not going to keep this inline style long, I'm just doing it to get us off the ground. Okay, alright, that's fine. Not really gridding that well because these aspect ratios are off. Why don't I fix that for just a moment by swapping out the ordering. If I had wanted to spend a little more time on it, I might do some kind of automated cropping on these photos so that that problem doesn't happen, but this is fine. So I don't want to have to manually insert these images, so I'm going to do something that I do every time, which is I'm now going to automate this by having my code of my website read what's in the photos directory and automatically render the elements. So we've got all these photos in here. I could manually write them in as image tags if I wanted to, but wouldn't it be nicer if the code could just go ahead and say, hey, any photo that's inside the photos directory, let's dump it into the page. So we're going to do that. We're going to do that, of course, using a web component. So I'm going to copy this web component code, and I'm going to make it the photo grid element. Photo grid and shadow.html. Just going to grab all this code for now and bring it over. And then I just need to I'm going to include my new photo grid element, and then I just get to do Bob's photo grid. Exact same result, right? Because all I did was wrap that HTML that was already in there with the web component. So now we have this Bob's photo grid that ends up calling this code here. Works exactly as before. We need one more thing, and that's the code that reads the list of photos and does the rendering automatically for us. So let's take this in a couple of steps. The first thing I'm going to do is factor out the CSS into a file, another file, because that's the sort of hygienic thing to do. So we'll do photo grid.css. Take this inline style, move it out into the CSS file. Object fit. I don't know object fit. That might be the kind of solution I need, but I actually don't know that attribute. Make sure that all works as expected. Now, what are we missing? Let's save it. Try again. we go. Object fit. Alright, so Ranger Mob is suggesting I try object fit. Oh, I don't know this one. Interesting. Let me try, well, we'll do this. We'll just try object fit contain and see what that gives us as we pull in these images. Okay, so at the outset, we're going to be loading. Right? So it'll be like that. So let's do this. Let's do, in the constructor, we'll create the shadow. We'll call a render function. And then we'll move this render behavior into the render function. And then we'll call this.load, which is asynchronous. Constructors can't be asynchronous, so I have to move this loading behavior into an asynchronous function. Read the photos listing. So we're going to render without any photos. We're going to load the photo listing, and once that's done, we'll re-render. So we need to also have this dot photo file names. That'll be empty at first. Instead of saying loading, why don't we just go ahead and do this? We will iterate the photo file names. And we will do image source equals photos main. And we'll join them all together. And what we should get is nothing, because it'll be an empty array. Yes, right, so nothing on there. Okay. So now let's read the photo listing. And to do this, we're going to use the data archive API. And we'll just instantiate it for our own location. And then we're going to do this.photo file names equals self.read here. Photos, right? So we're just using the data archive API to read the file names inside of the photos folder. And that will give us all the file names of each of these photos. And then when we're rendering, we can just iterate through them and write their image tags. And I saved it, and it didn't work. So what went wrong? Photo file names.map is not a function. Did I remember to await? I did not remember to await. Read here returns a promise, so I need to make sure to await that promise. And now, there we have it. Automatically loading up all of our images, rendering them to the page. Now let's see if we can't solve that object fit idea. Let's just try some of the different, the real question is the one that's long. You need to set a... Okay, you have to set a size you want it to be. Yeah, but I want to have dynamic sizing to some degree. Just out of curiosity. Okay, interesting. Yeah, how about that? So, I've been using a different method to get the cropping, but here it is. It's pretty... I'm sure I could spend a little more time to figure that out better, but for now we're just going to not worry about it. This is what Bob's photos are going to look like. But okay, let's step back and say, hey, isn't this neat? We basically have a photo sharing situation all set up. If I want to add more photos, it's really straightforward. I can just jump over to the folder that these photos are in and just bring over the image. So I'm just going to copy my avatar over, and it'll automatically reload because I got live reloading on. And there's the new photo, right? Super easy. This is like the easiest CMS that's ever existed. So that's the photo grid. Now we got one more page we need to... Eric says I need to do machine learning to do face detection. That's true, it's not complete until we got that, but we'll have to ignore that weakness for now. Let's get one last feature on this thing. And we're going to try to wrap it up at 3 o'clock, which is in 20 minutes. But after I'm done here, I'm going to open up a little bit of time for Q&A. But let's just handle one last feature, and that is the About page. This is really straightforward. We are going to do a similar thing where we're going to dynamically read the information we want to show from another file. And there's going to be an interesting benefit to doing that, which I'll demonstrate in half a second. I didn't pre-test this, but I think it'll work out good. So let's start by basically copying what we did before. We're going to make a web component for the profile. Right, so this is the About page, so this will be my profile. And we're going to have it read the data from profile.json. So we'll do profile.js. We'll copy this photo grid code since that's pretty close to what we want. And I'm just going to write this code real fast. So we'll put my name and an H1, and we'll put my bio inside of this div, and we'll also render my avatar. Actually, why don't we do that? And we'll go ahead and create that profile.css when we need it. This one's pretty simple. Rather than reading a directory, we're just going to read a file and parse the JSON. So that'll be await the JSON.parse await JSON, read the file, and now we just need the file to exist. And let's see what we get. Ranger asks if I'm using VS Code. I'm not. I'm using, what am I using? I'm using Sublime, Sublime Text 2. I'm actually behind a version. All right, we need to do a little bit more work here. We need to go to the About page and add in the profile module import, and then profile. All right, now what do we got? Sublime Text. Sublime Text is what you use in Texas, which is where I'm at. All right, hey, check it out. There it goes. Bob Boberson. Let's fix up the styles here. I believe I can use host, which is a web component. Let's do this real quick and see what happens. Nope. All right, forget that idea. You. Let's do, yeah, okay, we go. Let's do 60 pixels. Let's put it here. Just getting the layout of the profile a little nicer. So it's just not a giant picture. Okay, close. What is going on with the height? I guess it's just not doing the, oh, that's an aspect of flex. I'm not going to worry about that. Okay, we'll set that height to 60. We'll make it nice and rounded. And margin right. Okay, so now we have a nice About page, and we could probably render a whole lot more information. But again, this is pulling from dynamic content. which is a pattern that I think is actually really smart to use. Let me open up the profile.json. So here's the data, and here's the rendered result. This is a pattern that I think everybody should really, try to put to use, because it has a nice data and presentation separation, right? This profile.json is machine readable with no problem at all. You can just read the file and do a JSON.parse, and now you have all this easy to reuse information. If somebody were to want to look at Bob.com and give like a little profile card for this person, they could just read profile.json and they'd have the name and the bio and the avatar all that right there for them, right? So anytime, this is what I've been doing with my own website, anytime there's any kind of content, I never just write the content directly into the HTML, I actually write the information about the content into a JSON file. And then from there what I do is I dynamically load up that JSON file and render it onto the page. There's a lot of benefit to this. One of them is that it improves reusability for my code. It makes it so that I just have to update the JSON in order to update the content on my site. And then, you can reuse that JSON in lots of different applications, including if someday you wanted to make your own sort of UI for managing the content on your site, you could just be working with the JSON, and it's basically acting like a database for you. Now, I'll just real quick answer this question. Eric says, right now only Paul can edit the site, and only people who know the URL can see it. And would it be served from Paul's machine? That's all pretty much correct. If I were to hand out this URL, you'd be able to connect to my machine directly and pull it down, and I'm the only person that can edit the site right now. And we're working on some new features where I can say, Eric, you now are allowed to edit my site too, so we can add multiple authors, but that's not in there right now. Okay, so with a little bit of a drum roll, I'm going to try to pull off one last little trick. Fritter is a social application that we made. It's basically a Twitter clone. And we made it just to make sure that it was possible, right? It's sort of been our test bed for driving development on the DAT and Beaker stack. And so, the thing that's and it does not perform very well right now, that's one of the things that I'm working on. So my machine's really kind of crawling. But one of the things that I just did was that this profile.json that I wrote, that's the exact same format that Fritter uses for its profile.jsons for the different Fritter users. So, fingers crossed, if we're lucky, I should be able to load my profile, my bob.com inside of Fritter, and it should show up as a normal user. And there it is. Okay? So my bob.com just loaded up inside of Fritter just like you would expect. So let's take it one step further. Inside of Fritter, all of your posts are just JSON files underneath the post folder. And I need to get a timestamp real fast. And let's save that as 1.json. And if we're really lucky, I refresh this page. There it is. I fretted from bob.com, and Fritter was able to read that. It basically is just looking inside of the post folder, saw this JSON file, and read it in. Fritter was able to read it. So this bob.com site that I'm working on is compatible and integrates with Fritter. And so this is, I mentioned that we're talking about doing a sort of a multi-week series, and this is where we're headed with this idea. That you can have a personal website where you're working on the presentation, or you can use a template or somebody else's presentation side of thing, the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript, and you can basically create a website however you like it to look. But then we have some common file formats, things like the posts folder full of JSON files, the profile.json, things like that, which interoperate and integrate with other applications so that everybody is basically able to write their own software but still speak to one another with these common file standards. And so this is our sort of first step where I was showing how to make yourself a personal site, how to use web components. I mentioned that I'm going to show ES modules, but I guess I didn't hit that, so maybe I'll do that another time. But if there's anything that I think you should take away, it's that it's possible to create a pretty workable sort of templating system using web components. So I'm able to build a personal website using just the web components and have it all render on page load. I don't need any frameworks, I don't need any libraries. And then if I use these JSON files to keep all my content, I get an added benefit of being able to potentially integrate with other applications and other users and things like that by having common file formats. And so we will kind of keep on exploring this and showing what we've been working on in that front, and I think part of the weekly live streams will be taking that to the next step every week and showing how else this can work. So that's about it. That leaves us with 10 minutes left on the stream, so if anybody has any questions, we can do that, and if not, we can just chill for a little bit. So thanks everybody for coming. This was fun. So Jarrett asks, regarding versioning, would you be able to work and commit the work without pushing it? I.e., could you prevent live reloading? So this is something that we've been working on for a while and trying to find the right approach to. And there are basically two solutions right now. The first solution is, if you want to do some work on a project and not have it automatically synchronize, automatically push basically, you would first not sync in the actual target directory. Like whenever I have a local directory in the current version of Beaker, if you have a local directory set, it will automatically publish any changes. So I turn that off, and then I go to that folder. There's another tool that I wrote called tempdat. You just call tempdat in the folder, and it will create a temporary data archive for you to work with. So if I load this up, we should see the same content. Oh, interesting. Yeah, right, okay. So this is one way to do things, where you can basically generate a complete throwaway DAT for you to work on, and then once you're ready, you would be able to set the local folder again, and it'll synchronize again. That flow isn't perfect, but it's one option. And whenever I close this tempdat process, it'll absolutely throw away the DAT. It's gone for good. That's option number one. It's a little bit half-baked still, but it's there. Option number two is something we're working on in the leading edge, and I guess I probably shouldn't talk too much about it because it needs to develop a little bit more. But we're looking at trying to make a preview area where you can work on something and not have to publish it, and then once you're ready, you can review the changes that you've made and click the publish button. We have more or less been trying to get that flow right for about 6 months and struggled with different forms of accidental complexity. I personally think we have finally nailed it, but it'll be a few more weeks before we get anything out on that front. So that's the story there, Jarrett. Eric says, I'd like to hear more about your impressions on the distributed web conference. So that conference was really pretty great. It was run by the Internet Archive. It was in San Francisco. And I guess there must have been, well, the actual conference had about 700 to 800 people showing up. Lots of different tracks. There are different technologies that people are exploring, like different kind of blockchain solutions. Obviously, the DAT and Beaker community was all there. The IPFX Protocol Labs folks were there. I guess I haven't really thought about what my impressions are. I guess I would say that it was very exciting. There's obviously a whole lot of energy around the space, which is great. There's a lot of people showing up who don't necessarily have any opinions, but think that it's interesting and they just kind of wanted to check it out, which is actually, I think, a really good thing, because that means that we're kind of starting to look interesting to people outside of the hardcore, decentralization community. So that's pretty awesome. What else would I say about it? Yeah, I guess that's really all I have to say. It was really great seeing everybody together. I mean, there's the community that we have is just really excellent. Everybody is so friendly and so really, I think, smart and insightful. So like it was kind of like bouncing between everybody I'd ever talked to online and having just really great conversations every time. So it was really great seeing everybody, and I really enjoyed doing that. Hope that's gives you some insight into what that was like. All right, can I recommend any resources for learning peer-to-peer or resources for learning how the techniques behind Beaker works? Yeah, well, if you go to datprotocol.com, I'll put this into the chat real fast, you'll get a little bit of the sort of technical insides of the DAT protocol, and there's a lot of work still to be done in terms of documenting exactly how everything works inside of DAT. Partially, it's part of the problem is that DAT is actually still under a lot of active development, so there are pieces that are changing pretty frequently. We also just have limited resources to document everything. If you're interested in learning about the basic concepts of P2P that DAT is using, there's actually, P2P can mean a lot of things, but in particular DAT takes a lot of inspiration from BitTorrent. So if you were really interested in kind of understanding the core principles, I would first start by suggesting you check out BitTorrent and read up. They have their own site full of their specifications. I'm sure you could find lots of information about how BitTorrent works. So I would start there, and then I would dig into some of the DAT protocol specs that have already been published, and you might start to get a sense of how that works internally. It's pretty technical stuff, but hopefully approachable. Okay, so you got about 5 more minutes. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to ask. Trying to think if there's anything fun I could show before I close it up. What was my favorite peer-to-peer thing after DAT? That's a good question. Boy. You know, I might hate myself for saying this, but actually, the concepts behind, I don't like the execution for some specific reasons, but I actually think if you had to ask me like what my favorite peer-to-peer thing is in terms of how I find it technically gratifying, I definitely would have to say Bitcoin. So maybe you wouldn't expect that response, but it's by far one of the most interesting things to think about, and so yeah, that would be it. I don't plan on using Bitcoin or any blockchains until proof of work is replaced by something else. But I definitely think that the concepts are some of the most interesting stuff that's happened in a while. Yeah, go figure. Eric says that he liked the information civics paper. Thank you, Eric. I'm glad that you did. That was a really fun paper to write, and I'm always happy to talk more about that. But right now I'm just kind of getting it out, and why don't I give the link for that in case anybody's curious. Eric asks, does DAT plan to have an authentication layer, or would you have an interface to plug into another one? It's a tough question, actually. It depends actually on what you're authenticating with. That's sort of the reason it's hard to answer. If you're talking about authenticating with web services, you get at least that kind of like has a very clear path about what we're talking about, and probably at some point, but I'm not a crypto engineer. I'm not the right person to be designing those kinds of systems, so I can't speak in detail. I'll tell you, we do have basically plans for an identity layer, and that is this personal website project that we're sort of embarking on. I think it's really interesting to push for people to have their own, basically, website. The one that I'm working on, I just registered paulfrazee.com, and I'm going to put it there. I'm going to encourage everybody else to actually get a DNS short name, put up their own personal website there, and then use it not just as a sort of web presence, so a place that people can go to see your website, but also as the place where all of your applications are writing their data to. So then you would be ericrangel.com, and that's your identity. I think that's pretty powerful because it's very flexible, it's very intuitive, it's using the sort of native building blocks of the web to say that, yeah, like we've been joking around that like the dream of the 90s web is still alive in the peer-to-peer world. That's exactly the original idea, was that everybody would have their own website. But now what we're doing is treating that website as like simultaneously a place that you can go, but also almost like a part of a database. It's your identity inside of the database, that where the web itself is the database. And so that's the sort of design of the identity layer that we're looking at. And so DNS will be a part of it, but then of course we're going to be working on a web of trust sort of social graph where people can say, you know, this is the Paul Frazee that you are thinking of, and also like say that that's the correct public key and things like that, so that you can verify DNS entries in the same way that certificate authorities do, things like that. So in terms of turning these identities into a way to authenticate with a web service, I don't have anything in particular. That's where my mind goes with authentication. But in terms of acting as an identity, we definitely are thinking about using basically websites and reusing those websites across multiple different applications to contain all of a person's data and act as their profile and identity. So that's the plan there. Jared asks, are there any interesting or surprising things that you've seen people use the Data Archive API for? Let's see. I've seen a couple people use it for chat, which is kind of funny. You can definitely do that. And honestly, the latency wouldn't be awful. You probably end up, if I remember right, the people that did that, they just wrote to the same JSON file over and over. They would just append to the JSON file and dump it in. I'm like, all right, you know, it works. It's the JSON file, you're having to re-download the entire JSON file every time because of the way that the network protocol works right now, so it wasn't exactly the most ideal design, not to mention the sort of added overhead of what DAT does compared to what you really need for a chat channel, but it was still, that was maybe not that surprising, but still pretty funny to see. I don't actually even think you shouldn't do that. Feel free, you know, if it works for what you're trying to do. There's this cool poetry thing that somebody's doing right now, where the idea is that it's a poem that everybody works on, and if you want to work on it, you just fork it and add your bit to the end, and so it becomes this kind of chain of people's edits, which is pretty cool. There was this project where somebody took Secure, if I remember right, it was Secure Scuttlebutt, the traditional web, and Beaker, so a DAT site, and created a video that was split into 3 parts, and the only way that you could completely reassemble the video was to open it in the traditional browser, in Patchwork or one of the Secure Scuttlebutt clients, and then in Beaker, and then line the windows up together, and it was then it would assemble a full video, which was a really creative way of sort of, I don't know, poking at the, what does it say? I guess maybe that we're sort of fragmenting the web again, but maybe also that it's kind of a fun and creative thing to do, and I don't know, it was a neat project. Yeah. All right, well, we're pretty much at the end here, so I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This was a lot of fun, and we will do this again next week, same time. We're doing this now on Sundays at 2 p.m., so I'll catch you there. Everybody have a good one.